Hello friends, today I have for you an Invoke Calamity deck. Poggers! This is a 5-mana instant, which lets you cast 2 instant and or sorcery spells from your graveyard with total mana value 6 or less, and you do not have to pay its or their mana cost. Now this is a pretty strong instant that provides you both with card and mana advantage, and it gets better with the card quality of your instants and sorceries, of course. Now, I tried a couple versions of the deck, first in my head and then ended up testing 2 of them. The other one was Jeskai, but it just ended up losing to creatures or just being too slow versus other decks too often. So unfortunately, I do think the best way to play the deck is to go for the path of destruction by playing Invoke Despair. It's probably still the best 5-mana sorcery you can play in Standard. You get to remove 3 things: a planeswalker, a good enchantment, any creature, and if they can't, you draw a card. Opponent loses 2 life. Hard to beat. Of course, you have a little awkward mana base this way, but we got the Blackcleave Cliffs added from Phyrexia will all be 1, so this helps a little more. Of course, it's not untapped after turn 3, but I think the deck is interesting and like also in a sense of having quite some potential, enough to give it a shot. Then at the 4-mana spot we have Unleash the Inferno. If you do not know what that does, it removes pretty much any creature or planeswalker by dealing 7 damage to it, and then if there is excess damage dealt that way, you can then, equal to that excess damage, remove any artifact or enchantment with that mana value. And there's of course a bunch of good artifacts and enchantments in Standard. And even if it's like a Sheldred, let's say, because she has 5 toughness, maybe there's then still lying a Bankbuster around or a blood token, let's say. And you do know what blood tokens do in the late game, right? And yeah, ideally you flash this then also back with Invoke Calamity alongside a good 2-mana or 1-mana spells. Or ideally, if you luckily have an Invoke Despair in your graveyard, alongside some 1-drops. That's why we play those, or 1-mana spells, I guess, in this case. Then we also have the Capricious Hellraiser. This is a 6-mana dragon, but you can also cast him for 3 if you have 9 or more cards. Any cards in your graveyard. That's why we play mostly also instants and sorceries, because they put themselves into the graveyard. But usually you don't have that sooner as turn 5, turn 6 anyway, so this comes down later. That's why you don't want to play too many of them, I think. But yeah, it's still a pretty good card, because you can then play a card for free. You choose 3 at random, and then you get to choose a non-creature, non-land from it, and get to copy the spell, and you can cast it without paying its mana cost, which is obviously really good. But you want to have as few creatures as possible then, of course, because you have still a certain amount of lands in your deck, or maybe the graveyard. Probably not necessarily the graveyard, because you're not milling, but yeah, it's pretty good in this deck, of course. And yeah, then we just fill up the deck with as good as possible other cards in the 3, 2, and 1-mana spot. We play Fable because it discards cards. It's good for Hellraiser, both to enable its discount and to maybe even copy it later in the game, and just a good card in general. Of course, I probably don't have to explain what this does. It ramps us, it provides stability when it comes to better hands, and then Kiki Chiki is a good card in the late game too. Lets us maybe copy Ashmouth dragons, which can be pretty broken. Same with the Hellraiser, and even like copying a Bankbuster to draw an extra card for an additional 2 mana in the late game can also be valuable. Then you have Brotherhood's End, which I think makes sense as a 2-off in best of 1. Then we also have 2 copies of Riveteers Charm, which I think is best later in the game, because on turn 3, obviously, you don't want to necessarily hit a 5 or 6-mana spell, but it's pretty good in the late game to draw 3 cards at the opponent's end step, of course, and just having the flexibility of it acting as a Soul Shatter, just removing probably their best, because it's the most expensive creature or planeswalker, and also therefore going around like ward effects, for example, is pretty good. And also being able to excel a graveyard, let's say they have a Cityscape Leveler to unearth with. Yeah, and then at the 2-mana spot Bankbuster, it's just a good card in general. The Egg is pretty strong, I think. When it has 7 counters, it transforms into the Ashmouth Dragon. Whenever you cast a spell, it gets as many counters as the spell has mana value. Now, if you apply Invoke Calamity, usually the egg transforms, then you get 2 triggers if you have 2 instants and or sorceries in your graveyard right away from it, which is very good. But if you do not transform the egg, let's say you just played it and it only gets 5 counters, you do not get any counters of the additionally cast spells from Invoke because you did not pay any mana for them. Same with the Hellraiser, which is something to keep in mind. But Egg pretty cool in the deck, of course, a very good 2 mana spell, and by the way does not get removed by Brotherhood's End, of course. Pyre also just can discard lands in the late game, or maybe we are up against the control deck and have a bunch of removal. So flexible card, that's why it made the cut. Another option maybe could be an Edict or an Ichor, because you can proliferate an Egg counter, a Bankbuster counter, or make Fable transform into Kiki Chiki faster. So that's maybe an option, but I have it in the sideboard if you play best of 3 with it. I think you'd want to play this over the Edict, I guess, because if they have, let's say, a Harvester and a Sheldred, you want to remove the Sheldred. It has 5 toughness. And this is cute because it can also hit Planeswalkers. That's why I played 2 copies of Strangle over Cut Down, which obviously still makes the cut. Lol. And then we have some discard spells. But yeah, that's pretty much the deck. I had quite some fun when I was testing it. But now I'd say it's time to hop into some competitive constructed games in standard best of 1 and see how it competes with the other decks. Let's do it. Alrighty, first game, let's see what's up. Versus Tom Monkas. Seems about right. Nice and clean background here. Police the graveyard. Mulch me. And pyre me. I do. I do. I do. I'm fine. Now we have to do the right order. I think you have... Okay, opponent agrees, but we had to remove the creature first here. So I had to target Invoke first, I think, and then the... Unfortunately, we don't get to see that here, but I think I had to target Invoke first, and then the Strangle or Cut Down, because you wanna the thing that gets targeted second resolves first, I think, and obviously you wanna remove both of their creatures first and then resolve the Invoke to then deal 4 damage, because they only have Fable as an enchantment, no creature, no planeswalker, and deal 4. Next.
final moments of our lives. Patience. We will win. Phyrexia marches on. Phyrexia's influence still grows.
You deal with this annoyance.